On today's episode, it's the middle to the end of August. Josh and I have nothing to talk about. There's no basketball news. We're not going to sit here and lie to you. So we're going to give you our top 3 favorite players of all time. And why? Next.
Welcome back to the Two Pointers Podcast. I'm Josh.
And I'm Trevor.
And today on the Two Pointers Podcast, we have nothing to talk about. So that's a show. Okay, Trevor, you good? We're going? No. So I figured the best idea for us to be is to go back to, if you've been listening to the past several podcasts, I inexplicably almost stopped us in the middle of the podcast at one point, trying to understand why Carmelo Anthony was in Trevor's top 3 favorite players of all time. It made no sense to me, but today we're going to figure that out because Trevor and I are talking about our top 3 favorite players since, it's August.
And and it's been a fun week in the world of sports necessarily, but this is a basketball podcast and it's going to stay a basketball podcast. Obviously, there's things looming around the corner. Fantasy football. It's going to get sprinkled in. We're going to make fun comments.
Has it been a fun week in the world of sports?
If you care about baseball, if you care
about the Little League World Series, maybe, but
the Little League World Series. If you care about Major League Baseball playoff, playoff divisions heating up, and also what else? Oh, the golf, the golf kind of final couple matches here for the FedEx Cup. Maybe, I guess, it's definitely that August, kind of early September. Obviously, college football starts next week, so that's kind of the big token thing, which obviously then is dominated by the MLB playoffs, the NBA starting, the NFL. It just, this week is kind of this worst week in sports, kind of is what people have elected. So here we are talking about our top 3 favorite players of all time. To say that I'm not upset that Josh has spoiled mine, of course, because I have no idea about his and neither do the listeners. So we're going to start with you. And you told me you might have honorable mentions. So I'm looking forward to this.
I didn't spoil yours because you said
I spoiled mine. I've said
in
them
the
all.
Course of this podcast.
So that's going to make.
If you haven't listened to everything and you don't know, Trevor will go through it at some point.
Exactly. It'll be like, hey, here's at least the why, right? I want to at least defend myself on a couple of them. Cool. Honorable mentions from you first, because of course this wouldn't be a Two Pointers podcast without us sticking to a 3 or a 5 or a 10.
Well, so I had the idea of it because I've been very open about being a diehard Charlotte Hornets fan, but to be completely honest, at this point, I don't have a Charlotte Hornet player through Charlotte Hornets history that's one of my top 3 favorite players of all time. And I wanted to give honorable mentions to 2 of my favorite Hornets players to at least throw them out there because I'm not putting them in this list. First being Kemba Walker, who at this point, Kemba Walker is the greatest Hornet we've had so far, not counting that team that left and went to New Orleans. Kemba came in as a player that really struggled, honestly. People forget through his first 4 seasons in Charlotte. He wasn't very good. He shot about 29% from 3 in his first 4 years. No one really wanted to take a chance on him until Steve Clifford did. And eventually Kemba was able to kind of take over as leader in Charlotte when Al Jefferson came in. That pairing allowed for Kemba to kind of, he had a scoring big man that he could play off of and play the pick and roll off of, and really allowed him to blossom into an all-star in Charlotte that hadn't been there since Gerald Wallace. Kemba was able to then become the first ever 2-time all-star in the history of the expansion franchise since 2004. And he was the superstar we needed, loyal and loved the city, and eventually left. But, I always loved watching Kemba Walker. I still would think Kemba Walker is one of the best players in the past few years I've seen with 5 minutes to go, because he would always be able to get whatever he wanted offensively. I thought in his prime, he could get to the hoop. He would either get fouled or he's going to make that bucket in those final 5 minutes. He showed it to Kyrie Irving in his last year in Charlotte when he took Celtics on head on. But yeah, Kemba Walker, I wanted him as an honorable mention. Another honorable mention. Oh, you want to? Sorry.
No, the fun part about Kemba, I think a lot of people actually remember, not forget, is obviously it's his favoritism for a lot of people. I think that's the right context to that word. If it's not, so be it. But that cardiac Kemba shot in Madison Square Garden, like his return home with the Knicks this season, like that's going to be super cool. Like we're going to get tired of hearing it, right? He's from New York, all that stuff. Like it's really neat that it started kind of like that was the first breakthrough moment for him. A lot of people are like, well, that might be like, whoa, what are you talking about? It's probably his most famous moment ever. Like it probably, actually, I think that's not even close. The step back, right? I mean, it was
replayed every time championship week comes around on ESPN.
100%. It's overplayed, honestly, but it's one of the greatest college basketball plays I've seen, and it's memorable. And I think it's a great point that I knew Kimball was going to be on here in some way. I didn't think he'd be in the top three. I love that was at least mentioned.
Still have my Kemba Walker jersey. Someday I'll put it back on. Today's not today, but all love for Kemba. I never faulted Kemba for leaving. I hope he does well in New York.
It's funny you say that because the other thing I thought of when you mentioned him was him coming to that franchise and him being so impactful of all the things you mentioned. I'm not repeating. He also leaving is kind of the next. Him leaving wasn't a bad thing because it ushered in the LaMelo Ball. I'm not going to say the LaMelo Ball era, but him leaving helped lead to that. So I think that's important for the fact that he did all he did for that franchise and loved the city. It's nothing on. No one should be mad at him. Because here you guys are with LaMelo Ball, the Rookie of the Year. It's like that's a big deal.
I think it worked out in the long run for Charlotte. I'm not sure how well it did with Kemba, but I think he'll have a bounce back in New York. But Trevor provides perfect segue in what I'm going to say next in my honorable mentions, which I'm including this here because I think when it's all said and done, I will say this player is one of my top 3 favorites. But he's only played in the NBA for a year. But I'm going to throw LaMelo Ball in because I've never had more hope in my franchise than I do right now. Ever. That's it. I've never had more hope in Charlotte than I do with LaMelo Ball playing there.
As someone who watches me, by the way, not you, as someone who watches a lot of high school basketball and did a lot when the Ball brothers played in high school and their big kind of brand and LeVar's antics were going on. I say that because if you had told me, I've known you my whole life.
Yep.
That's why we do this together. If you had told me, anybody that told me 4 years ago that that would have come out of your mouth, I would have been like, sign me up for the lottery. I want the next ticket for $1 million because I wouldn't have believed you. He's played like 40 games.
Yep.
I love it. I think it's
50
awesome.
Some, I think, but
yeah.
One, he's incredibly exciting. He's he's the most exciting passer in the NBA. No one can touch him in that regard, as of right now. People care about the Charlotte Hornets. You don't understand how impactful this is for me. You're a Lakers fan. Your team gets talked about every day for 5 hours on the popular news shows. Every time they make a signing of somebody like Malik Monk, who didn't even barely made it off the bench in Charlotte, they act like it's a saving grace for the Lakers. But people care about the Hornets now. They're recognizing the fact that Miles Bridges is incredibly exciting, which wouldn't happen if one, LaMelo wasn't throwing the ball to him, and two, he was friends with LaMelo Ball.
Yeah, they're definitely
it's everything the Hornets needed to be popular. A player like Kelly Oubre turned down playing for championship teams to come play in Charlotte. I'm not saying that it's a major needle mover. He's going to be a good role player. But a player turned down a championship caliber teams to come play in Charlotte because of LaMelo Ball. That's huge.
Deal. It's huge.
It's a massive change.
At the end of the day, he's the ushering of another era of basketball that we're going to be looking forward to watching for the next 20 years. Anything else honorable mention wise? Mine, obviously, I have more than 2, and I want it to be. I'm going to be quick on mine.
Yeah, I have one more honorable.
Oh, you have 3. That's right. That's right.
I went back and forth whether or not I'd put this player at 3. But he redefined basketball in the 2010s and as one of the most exciting players to watch, and that's Stephen Curry. As a Charlotte basketball fan, I'm always going to love the Currys, even though I don't really like that Seth played at Duke, but we can forget that for set to the side. I'm going to love Del Curry for the great time he's been in Charlotte. Stephen Curry, who's a great friend of Charlotte sports teams. He's a Panthers fan like I am. And you can't watch Steph Curry play and be bored. I think it's a fair statement.
I don't think I've ever.
He's the most insane shooter I've ever seen. You never know what you're going to get, and he's got that personality you also want to root for in a player. But I didn't end up putting him. He's number 4, to be very clear. Like, he's number 4, but we only put it to 3 guys. But I could watch Steph Curry play any day, really.
Yeah, honestly, funny you say that at 4. Like why we chose 3, we kind of never really, it was never spoken to the listeners. Josh and I never really were like, wait, this is why it's 3. This episode
it's because you made that
minutes.
It's because you made that top 3 favorite players of all time comment a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, that's true. So I kind of did alley-oop it a little bit. Regardless, I don't know. I mean, there's kind of it's good. It's good. You'll see. I'll give you my 4th if that matters. Then, no, I like the Steph thing because Steph, honestly, like you mentioned, not being bored, right? Like he's a guy that it's weird because you could watch a game, any Warriors game. It could be like a Wizards game, the 3rd week of the season. Right, Warriors, Wizards. And it could literally be, you could forget Steph's on the court, but like that never really happens. It's almost like he's there. He might not be doing anything for like 2 to 3 minutes in a quarter, but then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, he has 30.
Like, or the next thing is like nothing's happening, but then you're like, oh wait, he just hit 5 threes in 5 straight possessions. Wait a second, what is happening?
Hold on. The roof is on fire. No, so I love the Steph one. I'm glad he wasn't in mine, but that's a great, I think anybody would have him in at least honorable mentions. No particular order except for when I say number, quote unquote, we'll say 4. Just for the fact that, and it's a lot of this era. I didn't actually go historic except for basically one time. I think we'll kind of Dwight Howard, no matter how you cut it, was amazing. And I think a lot of people forget. He was drafted in 2004, so a lot of people forget, like, he's considered an old vet. Like, he's considered like past that, just that tier of prime that we never thought all of a sudden would happen with Dwight, but with the back injuries and the thing in Orlando and the fallout thing, I mean, whatever, right? He all of a sudden had the back injuries as he leaves Orlando. And that's honestly, that was the last real top peak Dwight we ever got, honestly. Like, I think people are going to try to, maybe debate that, but I think the best Dwight Howard was the moment he left Orlando. Like, that was it. Obviously, back injuries, I get it, right? The reason I picked Dwight is actually because he's funny as heck off the court. I pick him for all the stuff that doesn't happen on the basketball court. I think that's the only reason he even makes my honorable mentions. I think I enjoy so many of the interviews, the Superman things, the capes, the commercials, everything that is whether it be good or bad off the court, the things that come with Dwight.
So, like, I actually completely agree with it on your side. I loved Dwight Howard back then. Like, and I think people are going to take this as weird and they're not remembering it correctly. But like, as me as a little kid who loved the dunk contest when it like really mattered, the trilogy of Dwight Howard versus Nate Robinson was awesome. And I was always like, I know a lot of people rooted for Nate because, like, he's small and it makes it cool. He does insane dunks. I was always rooting for Dwight Howard personally.
Dwight was better. 100%.
Yeah, no, he was. I always thought Nate's were a little cheap. Like, he's like, he jumped over someone. I'm like, no, he kind of hit him in the back and the guy ducked. I don't just feel like he did that. Like, Dwight dunked on a 12-foot goal. It's different standards here. But yeah, I mean, even like back in those late 2000s when the Magic were so insane, the Magic were my go-to 2K team at the time. To play with.
Hilarious. They were great.
Yeah.
Some of the best buzzer beater moments that we've had playing 2K. No, I love my favorite moment of Dwight ever is the phone booth. Like, you can't beat the walking in, walking out, ready. And then it's like that dunk.
Because he did that whole Superman thing before Cam Newton did it in the NFL.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Shaq was kind of the origin.
Yeah, Shaq. And then,
Dwight actually made it cool, I think. Honestly, it sounds ridiculous that Shaq didn't make something cool. And I'll use that as transition. Shaq's my number 2 honorable mention. I think that's just without spoken. Obviously, with being a Lakers fan, Shaq being one of, and if I'm going to pick Dwight for off-court antics, I think I should probably take the funniest guy off-court probably ever. I don't think that's even, that's probably not debatable. Shaq is probably one of the funniest people to ever play a sport, quite frankly. Shaq's funny from the moment he steps off the court. I don't even have there's nothing deeper than that. He's the most dominant player I've ever seen play. I mean, because obviously he was ushering out of his era when I started really, really watching. Obviously, that Heat team was kind of the last time he was quote unquote dominant, but Dwayne Wade kind of carried that team. So I think Shaq obviously the Lakers, that was the first year I watched, play was their breakup. So they being Kobe and Shaq. Shaq's just awesome, man. He's a cop. He's a mayor. He's an analyst on TNT. He's a DJ. He's a rapper. He's an author.
He's not necessarily good at all of these things, but
he's just all these things.
Yeah, he does a lot of stuff.
He's done all of these. At this point, I'm not surprised. And if 10 years he gets sick of TNT, he's like, I'm going to go be a congressman. Like, that would not be like, it's just the most random Shaq thing I can think of, but just.
I can't see Congressman Shaq, but okay.
I can see Shaq anything is the point. That's why he's my honorable mention. This one's topical. I'll just at least throw it out there for the two. Chris Paul. If I had to give you a point guard that wasn't in my top three, it's Chris. I just think it's because of his impact on our era. We divulged it pretty much entirely in the prior pods. If you haven't listened, Chris Paul's kind of an obvious one. If it wasn't Steph, it was Chris. If it wasn't Chris, it was Steph. Any thoughts on Chris, even though we kind of spent an entire episode on him?
No, we've talked a lot about Chris Paul. Just saying more ties to the state of North Carolina as far as basketball goes. So I'm just going to throw that out there.
Oh, if I had really taken the time to think through my honorable mentions, to be clear to the listeners, I put these honorable mentions on paper about 45 minutes ago. So I could have really thought these through like in detail and like why and the North Carolina thing. Like there's so many things I could have tied together as both of us from North Carolina. Chris is probably the good example there. I think actually he is the only example of that with transitioning to LeBron. And LeBron's not even like I'm just throwing it out for the both of us. LeBron's an honorable mention because it's LeBron. It's the era of GOAT.
You're not throwing it out for me. LeBron's great, but I wouldn't put him anywhere near my favorites.
All right. Well, in terms of basketball impact as a child, I'm going to throw him on there because it's LeBron James. I don't have to divulge that. This one is the last one, and this is number 4. Shaq was technically number 4, so I don't really have a 4, but Tony Parker. I forget about Tony Parker sometimes, and then I'm like, you know, it'd be really fun is to watch the Spurs ball movement just for a couple minutes. I just need to like get back into the basketball mood. I watched Tony Parker hit 12-foot mid-range shots, and it's the most satisfying nerd basketball thing I probably ever partake in. And I'd do it every day if I could, and I probably would. Tony Parker was awesome. He was kind of the one guy where you were like, have you ever met anybody that hates Tony Parker? Probably not. Me neither. So Tony Parker was just fun. It was just something about like the charismatic and lack of anything outside of him on the floor and being a leader that I liked. And even though I couldn't stand those San Antonio teams for beating the Lakers multiple times, Tony Parker made me hate them less. You could throw Tim in that kind of example too. I honestly, all three of them, Manu as well. So, but Tony's kind of the one guy I enjoyed using in 2K. I love the Spurs. They were so much fun because they couldn't, but this was when the 3-point didn't matter. We grew up in a 2K era where the 3-pointer kind of became every year got better and better. Yeah. And the Spurs were kind of like the best mid-range team when mid-range mattered. And that was who I wanted to use because I knew I couldn't mess with Tony Parker. So that was it. Josh, I'm ready for your number 3. Tony Parker was in. Any thoughts on Tony? Any thoughts on mine, I guess?
A lot. Like I remember, I can't say I really got behind those Spurs teams. But I mean, Tony Parker was great. Yeah, I mean, it's like I didn't ever root against him, really. I think I was probably rooting for him at the time, but I didn't really want to see the Miami Heat super team that were kind of, which they're cool to look back on, but like the climate at the time, they were the super villains of the league, and I was definitely probably more on that Spurs side with Tony Parker and Tim Duncan. I'd say I probably definitely like Tim Duncan better. I was a big Tim Duncan guy. Just the fact that he made mid-range bank shots cool. Just put that out
he
there.
Did. It was weird, and he did.
It was weird. And let's also not talk about how hard it is to hit one of those mid-range bank shots. If you guys think it's easy, go out, pick up a basketball, go to the basketball court. See how many mid-range bank shots you can hit. Just step out about 20 feet and try to hit a bank shot.
Thank you
from the elbow.
Thank you for clarifying the distance. I think a lot of people might misunderstand that as like little like baby hooks from like 4 feet. Oh, no.
Step out to 20 feet and try to see how many bank shots you can hit. And Tim Duncan did it automatically. I just don't get that. But
from top to bottom on those teams. No, I love it.
I'm going to say since my top 3 is a bit more of a mystery, let's start with your number 3, and then we'll go into
all right, fine. All right, so number 3, and it's I have spoiled this list in order. So this is going to be I'm going to at least I'm going to spend more time defending myself than anything.
We all want to hear it.
It's not really defensive, right? It's more like, okay, it has everything to do with why I picked the other 4. When I say favorite, I literally mean favorite. These guys, I could have picked.
So do I.
insert seventh man on the Pistons from 2004.
Let's
And
be
if
honest,
I
you
liked
wouldn't have
him,
picked anybody from the Pistons.
that is true. My point being, that was the first team that came to mind that won a title in the 2000s. That was very random. And it was also topical based on last episode. If you haven't listened, please go listen to the Mouse and the Palace episode. I have to get a plug in anytime I can. The reason I say what I say about these is when I say favorite, it doesn't matter the skill level. However, all three of these guys are Hall of Famers. Carmelo Anthony is number 3 for me. And I'll tell you, this one was actually the easiest answer of them all. It comes down to the fact that I got to watch him for a good portion, right? Those Denver days. I think a lot of our audience might be younger than we think sometimes, or we got to remember that we were born in the last century. And some people don't remember the Nuggets Melo. They only remember New York Melo or Portland Melo or, crazy to think now, Los Angeles Melo. A lot of Melos, right? A lot of different Melos, actually.
A lot of different Melos. Hoodie Melo, right. USA Melo.
USA Melo, exactly. And the USA was, I loved the Olympics growing up. Yeah. Basketball-wise, I still do. Peacock made it difficult this year. But Carmelo, I wanted to be Carmelo when I played basketball. As crazy as that, he was kind of like the Steph for me growing up. It was like these kids want to shoot like Steph. I wanted to shoot like Melo. I wanted to pull up my favorite buzzer beater. Obviously, yes, I'll get to a couple buzzer beaters in a minute. But that Melo New York one where he stepped back, I don't remember who it was. I think it might have been the Heat. It was a Christmas game where he stepped back to the right and just pulled back from 35 feet. Those shots are you look back in NBA history, there's not a lot of guys that can make that shot consistently. And yes, Melo's a heat check guy. I'm gonna be real with you. There's a theme to my list. He's the first one of the 3. He's a heat check guy. But people forget, he shot career-wise, he's almost a 36% three-point shooter. So you say heat check, but yet he still is an above-average player. So to defend myself, I wanted to be like him or shoot like him, play like him, shoot like him, and be cool like Melo, man. The headband, the Reeboks, everything about Melo just made it fun.
And I'll even add in, I feel like you failed to mention one of the most dominant freshman college basketball seasons. I will go ahead and say the most dominant freshman college basketball season in the 2000s.
Yeah, I don't think Carmelo ever, maybe not ever.
Maybe not ever.
But it was
I wouldn't go ever. But in the 2000s,
research.
The most dominant freshman year in college basketball. He single-handedly carried Syracuse to the last national championship they won in 2003.
Crazy to think that too. As good as they've been for history, it's wild that he was the last one. That's a good point because I'd have to definitely, I'd have to do some research just to make sure I'm clear on who the best freshman of all time would be. But when I think of freshman NCAA runs, I think of that one most of the time. It's just a matter of was Anthony Davis is better, things like that, right? But yeah, Melo's was great, man. They won a title. That's the ultimate goal.
Mm-hmm.
He was amazing. I mean, that draft class, he was passed for Darko Milicic. He literally will be the 4th Hall of Famer in that trio or in that quad of guys in that top 5. So the biggest thing for me is he still remembers that stuff too. I love guys that use that chip on the shoulder mentality. He's never shown that, but recently on I think it's Up in Smoke is the Matt Barnes podcast. I want to say if I'm misquoting the name of the podcast, people can go find it. But long story short, he was on Matt Barnes' podcast, and he still thinks about the fact that the Pistons, up until draft night, up until the hour before, I didn't know this until literally the other day, they promised him a pick at 2. What his career would have been like. We talked about it not too long ago with prep for this pod, what his career could have been.
But forget that and say, what could the Pistons have been?
Right? They
just
come off the title.
Won the title in 2004, the next year.
Yep.
They had the number 2 pick. Just imagine if that lineup was, instead of Tayshaun Prince, it was Chauncey Billups, Richard Hamilton, Carmelo Anthony, Rasheed Wallace. And
they were clear. Melo would have been off the bench. Melo would have developed into a player to replace Tayshaun.
Would that Pistons powerhouse have ever broken up if Carmelo Anthony was drafted?
I mean, health and injuries maybe aside, yeah. I mean, I don't know. At that point,
they probably would have won more than 2 titles, I would guess.
The Heat might not have a title because of that.
Yeah,
that's
the
crazy.
Heat might not have that 06 title.
That's wild. I know it's like, and I don't like to do what ifs with
Wade.
a lot of my lists, like in terms of NBA stuff, but like he truly is a good example of a lot of things that could have happened differently. Imagine he doesn't go to Syracuse. The implications of that draft being different and not being historically one of the greatest drafts of all time.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of things that really, like if you really just take Carmelo Anthony and change one tiny thing about his career, he probably has more titles, less points overall, however, but he's just bolstering a Hall of Fame resume that we've already given him that. I think Basketball Reference has him at Hall of Fame percentage at like 88% right now.
He's definitely a Hall of
So
Famer.
be it. He's a Hall of Famer. Exactly. It's the Basketball Hall of Fame. So enough on Carmelo Anthony, Josh. I'm excited to hear your number 3. Unless you have any more thoughts on Melo. Melo's a great the Melo, by the way. When I say Melo, Josh and I argue about this all the time. LaMelo will take it over. I will be willing to admit that as much as I like Carmelo. He's also one of the 2 jerseys out of my 3 that I have. I have a Knicks Christmas. It's like one of the Christmas ones they did without the sleeves. Those god awful sleeve jerseys. I have one of the really nice like Knicks Christmas throwbacks, and it's Melo, and I only wear it for special occasions that I wear jerseys for. So it's one of my favorites. Shout out to Melo. Shout out to hopefully he could change his legacy this year.
You just want him to win his title this year because you want the Lakers to win another one.
It would be the most perfect storm.
It's transparent.
It would be perfect storm.
Okay, number 3. This is probably gonna take you. It was weird, and it honestly did for me too. But as I think about players that, like, honestly, in watching basketball over the past few years, and make my jaw drop when I watch them play, I love watching Giannis Antetokounmpo play basketball. I really do. The Greek Freak is I've never seen a player like this before. And I think that's the reason it stands out to me. I was unquestionably rooting for him hard this postseason. Everyone could tell he's such a good guy. He focuses on basketball. He worked so hard for that, for the city that drafted him, that he was loyal to. And I was there for every bit of it. And you just see how good of a guy he is afterwards, and the purity of the celebration with Milwaukee. And I love the fact that he stuck it with Milwaukee throughout all the rumors when his contract was coming up, and he stayed there and he won the title and he brought it there. He didn't go to Golden State, who would have probably gladly have taken him, would have signed him right up and won titles maybe more easily. But I haven't seen someone who can pick up his dribble before getting to the free throw line, take a Euro step, and dunk the basketball over your starting center. But I've seen him do that a million times, which we just need to talk about how ridiculous that is. I haven't seen anybody who's gone full court and 2 dribbles and then dunk a basketball until watching Giannis Antetokounmpo, which I've seen him do in his Greek national team highlights. 2 dribbles, full court. Grab the board, 2 dribbles, 1 step, 2 step, dunk.
I'll say it. That's homework for the week.
Yeah.
For anybody who has
it's ridiculous.
I've seen it.
The reason they call him the Greek Freak is because there is no one else, and I don't know if I'll ever see anyone else who can do what he does. You can't have people emulate a style because people can't do what he does. There's no one else with the physical traits to do that.
So when you think of basketball impact, like all time, he's definitely going to be in people's top 5 and 10. It's not a position thing; it's a list thing at that point. His impact. One thing you kind of made me realize that as big of a basketball fan as we are, big as basketball people and whatnot that we are, whatever word you want to describe us as at this point. One thing I never kind of put 2 and 2 together on for him was the focus and skill, or focus on talent and skill and development that he has, as well as the personality mix. Mm-hmm. There's not many guys. Like Shaq was kind of a little bit, but Shaq didn't care about his weight. Shaq didn't care about developing. Like he wasn't like, he basically, Giannis has like that Kobe mentality with that Shaq happy, lovey, whatever, right? The personality thing. And there's really not a way I can describe that together. Like he's very rare for that aspect. I never put that together until you said it. I see it now from the NBA Finals. Like afterwards, giving the trophy to Rachel Nichols and giving the trophy to people. He took it to Greece with him on the way home this last week here. Like he's giving it out to people, letting him play with it and stuff. But he's also probably in the gym 8 hours a day still in the offseason. And he's that kind of guy.
So one of the things that made me kind of go to the point where I loved Giannis as a basketball player. There's an article that was written, I don't remember who it was, in ESPN, kind of just really kind of a deep dive into Giannis, the player. I think it might have been right after his first MVP award. And the way they kind of wrote it is like, I mean, Giannis he's the complete opposite of your LaMelo Balls, your LeBron Jameses that are involved in all of these celebrity status things off the court. Giannis is a celebrity, but he doesn't act like it. He's like chronicled that his day was he got up early. Sometimes he would run to Milwaukee State Arena in town. He'd run there, works out, has basketball practice, goes home, eats, watches film, goes to sleep, repeat. That's his day. I'm not saying that I would be that wholly focused on basketball thing, but it was like, it's the Mamba mentality that you talked about. It's he has the commitment level to basketball Kobe Bryant had.
There's a reason that Kobe was kind of proteging him his way through the latter part of his career as he was transitioning out of basketball. I want to bring up a good point for Giannis for you, because I think this is important that this just came out. But Miran Fader's book that she's been working on for close to 5 years now. I thought that's what you were referring to when you mentioned the ESPN article. I know what article you're talking about. I just can't think of the timeline of it. I think it was after the first MVP. But Miran Fader wrote a great book, supposedly. Grayson's actually in the middle of reading it. Fun fact, I am next. It's next on my book list in terms of I like to read older books first before I start buying new stuff.
Yeah.
But the Improbable Rise of NBA MVP Giannis is going to be a great book. I haven't even read it yet. I'm going to give her the praise for it now, and I haven't read it. So
I've heard there's some funny Coach Jason Kidd stories in there.
There are. Grayson texted me. He said they are great, and he will not spoil them.
Coach Jason Kidd stories. So I'm not going to spoil what's in there.
He said, "Let's not spoil them." He's like,
I've read it. I've been sent a couple of those stories.
Nice. I'm looking forward to it.
And they are unbelievable, to say the least.
I'm excited.
But yeah, I mean, that's what it comes. This isn't the last player spoiler that is currently playing that I'm going to name up here. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, I picked a lot of players that are very connected to my teams, or like Steph Curry, have a pipe dream that he'll retire with one of my teams, although I realize it's not going to happen anymore. But yeah, Giannis is my guy. I love watching him, and I'm only going to root against him when Charlotte's playing Milwaukee. So
it's even hard probably to do that too.
No, it's not.
Okay. All right. Number 2. And now this one is the one where I kind of step out of the current realm. This is the only realm, the current era. This is the only guy that I consider a guy from prior era, because I think he was for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to post this photo on our Twitter later tonight, because I think people need to see it. I think this is really cool. And you're going to send me something about one of your guys, and we're going to post some stuff about these guys. It's going to be really cool. I'm holding up, of course, non-visual podcast. Love it. I'm holding up a Slam cover that is my favorite Slam cover of all time. I'm a diehard Slam magazine fan, and the fact that I didn't collect them growing up as a kid makes me hate myself growing up as a kid. However, my favorite Slam magazine cover of all time was a Allen Iverson, number 2. Allen Iverson released cover from, actually the year's not even on here because this is a re-release. However, Slam re-released this cover, and I bought it the moment it came out, and I paid express shipping to get it here. I will post it. It's the coolest, most swag-filled cover of any basketball player of ever, any era of any time.
I mean, you can tell it's from a different era. I'm just looking at
Allen Iverson, and I use the word swagger. It's the fro that he barely kept.
Man. If any player in NBA history was the word swagger, it's Allen Iverson.
That is literally the reason he's number 2 on my list, is swagger. All the things I said about Melo aside, if I grew up in the AI era, I'm just going to call it that for the example's sake, because he played in the 90s. He also played in the 2000s, and he also kind of peaked his way into the late 2000s as he started to wind down his career for reasons unmentioned. Allen Iverson was the definition of what I would have watched him would have been. I probably would be a Sixers fan right now if I was born 10 years earlier. I'll just be real. Like straight up. Allen Iverson, the swag, the rose, the afro, everything about it. Like the court, one of the only people I can't find Michael Jordan crossover clips. But if you look up right now, Allen Iverson crosses over Michael Jordan. It's got millions of views. It is the coolest.
It several times.
It's crazy. Like
rookie Allen Iverson crosses
rookie
over Michael Jordan.
Allen Iverson, right? Name another player in NBA history that has done that. I can't. It's wild. Allen had this just charismatic off the court kind of like charismatic one. And let me clarify, because off the court, he had a lot of things that we're going to like we can cover Allen Iverson at some point in the future. The reason I'm giving him my spotlight for my spot is because everything aside, the bankruptcy, the stuff prior to his Georgetown time, the could have been, should have been football player, all this stuff, right? He was supposed to be this world-renowned quarterback. Allen Iverson's a Hall of Famer in basketball. All those things aside. And it's the reason I say that with such like just period at the end of it is because he's still respected to this day despite all that stuff, right? Despite he could have been a football player, despite the bowling alley incident, despite bankruptcy. Like Allen Iverson and his impact on basketball and what he just cares about. When you see him now, you don't see him a lot. He's really not in the limelight. That's the thing I think a lot of people don't realize is when he was in the crowd, the one moment that comes to my mind that kind of just hits home for me, and I'll kind of merge this by accident, is when after Kobe's death, Allen Iverson it was one of the last games before kind of COVID obviously took over and sent people home. And Allen was like out at this game doing something. I don't remember what it was for. It was for something in Philadelphia. And obviously that being a big city for Kobe, there was a bunch of moments where he was walking up to guys that he had played 20 years before him and 20 years after him. And like the love and respect that people have for him, players have for him. He said he's a very fraternal guy. And it really I love everything about him now in this era of his life. And I think it's also obviously a testament of how he's changed and how he's grown from his time as a player and his image as a player. So I don't really have a sure answer for you, Josh, but Allen Iverson, for a lot of reasons, is number 2 for me. Any thoughts on AI? I actually have no idea what you think about AI.
Well, I mean, we're talking about practice.
I love it.
Not a game, practice. I hope everyone got that. I was just listening because I don't really know how else to explain it. If you don't get that, just look up those words with Allen. Just type in Allen Iverson practice and have some fun. But yeah, AI was my go-to. It's probably my favorite 2K player ever. One, because I feel like there's a reason that his nickname was AI Speed. One of the fastest players on the court with the ball in his hands we've ever seen. I'm surprised he went through that whole time talking about swagger and avoided the legendary crossover hit shot and stepping over Tyronn Lue in the NBA Finals. Just looking down at him with disdain for even attempting to guard him. The most hilarious thing Allen Iverson's ever done. As far as greatness goes, the 2 greatest Sixers of all time are Dr. J. Julius Erving and Allen Iverson. He's one of the most talented point guards I've ever seen. I'm honestly a little ashamed of myself that I didn't put him in my top 5 point guards, or at least talk about him when we did that.
So that's the thing I wanted to ask you, actually. So I wanted to leave stats.
He's a combo guard, but
yeah, he's not a point guard, but he's also
a combo guard, but he was 6 foot, maybe 6'1" in high tops,
and he's a 26 point per game average. I wanted to leave like stats out of this, but
because he's faster than anybody that's ever hit the court.
It's crazy.
Couldn't catch him.
He played less than 1,000 games in his career. I just wanted you to know if you didn't know that. In the peak of his powers, I'm going to say, he does have an MVP, which, all things aside, historically, obviously, Derrick
2001, right?
Yeah, 2001 season. People are going to forget, in terms of just dominance, that's probably one of the best dominating seasons by a player ever. To win MVP, to make it to the finals, to be the only loss that a undefeated Lakers team up until that point in the playoffs takes in game 1, to basically make the Lakers crap down their leg for a second and be like, whoa, Allen Iverson might send us home. No, they didn't think that. But still, Allen Iverson put the fear in at least a little bit of their heart. that was probably, when you think of like just statistically, like obviously not a great 3-point shooter, but like just Allen Iverson made people like basketball. He made people want to like be like, okay, he has swag and he's fun. Like it was just this weird mix of a couple things. Yes, there's some antics things there, right? But just
antics.
The nickname sures it up for me. The answer.
The answer.
When you need a bucket, when you can't figure out what to do, what's the answer? It's Allen Iverson, right? Like that's really where it comes down to it for me. I'm going to leave a couple more things here with Allen Iverson. For basically, he really had 8 great seasons. And if you want to just take a divulge at Basketball Reference at some point, listeners, please do. But for him to be an 11-time All-Star and for him to have 8 All-Star seasons, in my opinion, like in terms of statistically, shows you kind of like where he was loved and appreciated beyond his peak, right? So 11-time All-Star, who's a 4-time scoring champion at 6 foot tall, like you said, right? The only thing really missing, I mean, all rookie, All-Star game MVP twice. He made the All-Star game fun. He was Charles Barkley's number, they did an All-Star fantasy draft.
I remember that.
Ago.
I watched that live. Yeah. He picked Allen Iverson. Everyone was like,
first. Charles, what are you doing? He's like, this is the All-Star game. I want a guy like Allen Iverson.
You can pick any player ever. Charles Barkley goes, I'm taking Allen Iverson.
I'll end with this. Rookie of the year, and if that, again, homework for a second time. That is probably the funniest hour of basketball debate talk ever. It is the funniest episode. I'll link it on Twitter later. And then 3-time steals champion.
Yeah.
He led the NBA 3 times in steals.
AI speed.
I love it. He would take it and run. Josh, I'm done with AI because my last one's not going to be long. So, Josh, number 2 for you. Can I guess one of the last 2 since I hear Giannis? I just want one guess because I think I'm going to get one of these 2 right. Don't tell me.
Sure.
I'm going to say I'm right. You can just not react. I thought number 3 was going to be Yao Ming. Josh, who is your number 2?
So I'm going to give you a couple of hints that should make it obvious and then have you guess who it is. No, it's not Yao Ming. Who should make you guess who it is? As I mentioned earlier when we were talking about Dwight Howard, I love dunk contests. I love dunking. Dunking is exciting in the game of basketball. I also love the University of North Carolina. Trevor, who do you think my number 2 is?
Man. The greatest dunker of all time.
Dude, how can you not love Vince Carter?
Vince Carter, yeah, Vince there it is.
Carter. You can't not love Vince Carter. He's one of the most, and you're talking about another guy who was, I wouldn't say he necessarily did it off the court, but on the court, that guy, I mean, he had swagger. He was in your face. He would jump completely over you. Didn't matter if you were 7 feet tall and it was the Olympics. He would jump, clear you completely. He would stick his elbow all the way into the basket on a dunk because he jumped out of the building. There's a reason that people wanted this guy at 40 years old to compete in the dunk contest again. And he said he didn't want to do that so that people's last memories of him in the dunk contest wouldn't be disappointing. But, man, a 20-year career in the NBA. He made the Toronto Raptors exciting, which not a lot of people could do. When I first started paying attention to basketball, he was on that New Jersey Nets team with Jason Kidd and
Richard Jefferson,
which I don't know how that team didn't win something because
they made the finals.
Yeah,
they did make the finals.
But like, I mean, that was a big 3 before the big 3 was Kidd, Carter, and Jefferson. Man, but VC, I mean, like, if you come around University of North Carolina now, after the Jordan jerseys, the next one you see the most is the Carter jerseys. Still incredibly loved from his time in college and those teams with Antoine Jameson, which they didn't end up winning a national championship, which considering that was like one of the most crazy duos, you look back now at the NBA and you're like, how did that not happen? Man, Vince Carter was fun. And like, he's known for being that greatest dunker. He was talented at everything. He could score from anywhere on the court. And we kind of just look back at his dunk highlights now. But he could score from anywhere. He was on some of the most insanely exciting teams in the NBA, whether it was in Toronto, whether it was in New Jersey, bouncing around anywhere, and really just hung up his Nikes. I don't know if he was sponsored by Nike. He hung up his shoes like last year with the pandemic starting, but Vince Carter's the guy.
So My favorite thing about Vince, I won't spend too much time on Vince because I mentioned earlier, and you mentioned as well briefly about the honorable mentions, how if we had more time, the North Carolina love, things like that. I actually don't know. Is he from North Carolina? Obviously, he went to North Carolina. Let me look it up while
I
we're
don't
talking.
think so. But
So Vince Carter, I'm gonna talk while I look it up. This is gonna be fun. So Vince Carter, my favorite thing about him is that, like you mentioned, the Raptors thing making it exciting, like that you took the words out of my mouth for one of my points. But he also
from Florida.
He had 3. Oh, that's right. He's Daytona. That's right. Daytona Beach, because I was in Daytona a few years ago, and he has the high school he went to is named. The gym is literally named Vince Carter's high school, or Vince Carter Gym, or whatever. It's a huge
Mainland High School, Daytona Beach, Florida.
Right off the highway. I remember seeing it now. It was a huge complex. It was really cool. I do remember that now. So Vince, my favorite thing about Vince is that he basically has 3 careers. He has 3 impactful careers. He literally has the college and first couple years in Toronto, which, like you said, made Toronto exciting. He has the Nets and the Magic, where he really tries to compete for a title and tries to be this player, like overall round player, athletic freak first, athletic, or all around player second. And then the veteran of what we remember. We remember 10-year vet Vince Carter from his 11th and 12th seasons on. He's been a vet for many different teams, Hawks. And I believe at one point he was on the Suns.
Yep.
Grizzlies. It gets weird.
To be clear, I remember New Jersey Vince Carter.
I do too. What I see in terms of what I remember, obviously more recently, is those teams where he was that veteran leader that really mattered. And he really developed a lot of guys in front of him. If I took the time to research some of the guys he's got to play with and develop, they've probably turned out okay. Vince Carter's probably the reason. In terms of basketball, in terms of just players you respect, and not less like, I'm glad he's on your list. I really like that for you. Respect is the only word I could think of with Vince Carter. I respect everything he's done for basketball. I respect everything he's done for players that he's helped develop. He's a great coach too.
Done a thing that probably won't ever happen again, which is the only NBA player to play in 4 decades.
That's wild.
It's not going to happen anymore. It's only because of the weirdness of him entering the league in 1999 and retiring in 2020 that he is able to play in 4 different decades.
Also, seriously, greatest dunker of all time. I don't think you and I are ever going to debate that. It's Vince Carter. Yeah. When you combine, I'm going to give Shea Serrano a shout out really quick. His book of basketball, or his book,
dunk contest in game. It doesn't matter. There's no qualifier.
It doesn't matter.
Vince Carter, doesn't matter what scenario you put it in.
His basketball book, Basketball and Other Things, Shea Serrano, went through all these categories. I'll let him do the storytelling, but all these categories, and even if Vince doesn't win every one of them, he averages out the best score. And it's Vince Carter, the only player to ever jump over a player in a live game.
A 7-foot tall player. The guy he jumped over was 7 feet tall in a live game, completely clear him.
Crazy. Josh, number 1. I'm excited to hear your number 1. So I'm going to get mine out of the way quickly because we basically have an entire podcast already done about my number 1 player. So I will not spend much time for listeners that have heard it. And I'm going to save the tears too. That episode was enough. I'm going to just be clear. But my favorite player of all time, I don't think it's even close. I don't think people, this doesn't need to be a visual podcast for them to know that. I've talked about it plenty. Kobe Bryant is my favorite. I could sit here and go, Black Mamba, KB24, the 8th Man, Lord of the Rings, whatever nickname, right? It doesn't matter. He's not known by a nickname to me. He's known by the greatest player I got to watch play for so many years. The reason, and it literally, if you had to ask me right now, why, what's the one reason, period, I would tell you he's the reason I like basketball, period. I think Dear Basketball, the film, just summarize my basketball experience, in terms of why, right? I mean, he really is the only reason I care about it, right? The only reason I like the team that he played for 20 years. The only player I have tattooed on my body. I mean, you could the list goes on, right? Jerseys behind me. Just when you think of impactful player in someone's life, impactful person, impactful, just celebrity, because that's really a good word for it. That's my number 1. If you want to know more detail, listeners, go about 20 episodes back in this feed, click Kobe Bryant tribute on his 1-year anniversary of his death. We divulge both of our favorite moments and favorite reasonings and things like that. We went through a lot of things, stats, moments. It's overall one of our best pods, in my opinion. So, Josh, I don't have anything else to say about Kobe. I mean, I can't anymore. I feel like I've rang that towel out.
I want to also I don't know if we've pointed out enough, but to put credit on something that we don't see as much in the NBA now. We may see it with Stephen Curry, but Kobe Bryant was insanely successful, and he stayed with the Lakers his whole career. There aren't a lot of players that you're going to see ever that stay with one team. And Kobe Bryant stayed. Kobe didn't leave the Lakers when a lot of people would tell him that he should have, when the team was terrible at the end. But that was his team, that's his franchise, and he stayed there. And much can be said about all the great Lakers, but there's a strong argument for anyone to make about Kobe Bryant being the name that should be said when you think Los Angeles Lakers.
That shouldn't even be a debate. I don't care what
era. It is going to come up with Kareem. It's going to come with Magic.
I get it.
I don't think people should say LeBron, even though they say LeBron, because he's only been there for 3 years. So it's not.
No, and it's just
one of the greatest players ever, but it's not you're synonymous with the Lakers thing. LeBron's not synonymous with the Lakers.
No. When you think of that franchise and that color.
Yeah, I only think of Kobe, Kareem, and Magic. So those three.
Yeah. And obviously for us, it's the era thing, so it's really
and for us, it's Kobe, and it's waking up as a kid to watch ESPN and seeing Kobe hit shot after shot after shot against the Toronto Raptors and hit an insane point total that I still can't believe is real at 81 watching it. Not to mention the wilt part, but I didn't live through wilt part, obviously.
Not many people still are alive for that.
That lived through Wilt's 100, but and Kobe was great. So, to my number one, I'm probably going to make you angry, but here we go, because there's nothing
Can we play
fun
hints?
Or exciting that you're going to, what?
Can we do the hint thing again, I guess?
You can guess it right now by the fact that I'm going to make you angry. You can go for it.
I have no clue, to be honest with you. That's why I like this list. That's why I'm excited to do this episode.
Okay, so to kind of explain parts to listeners and why I just feel a loyalty to this player, I fell in love with college basketball long before I did pro basketball. We both grew up in North Carolina, very close to Tobacco Road, and it matters a lot. And the biggest legend in the history of basketball in the state of North Carolina, because he's from the state, went to college in the state, is the greatest player of all time, Michael Jeffrey Jordan. And this is going to sound boring. I said you were going to be upset about it because it's going to be boring, because it would seem like a generic answer. But I'm a Carolina guy. I've got 2 Jordan jerseys in my closet, one in light blue and one in white. He brought home a national championship to UNC and still played there for 2 more years, which is the fun part, because nobody else really thinks through the 2 years after Worthy left that he went on to become the star of the program. And he went on to win 6 NBA titles. Achievement that's only really eclipsed by the Bill Russell teams when they won like 11. And he's the name that is synonymous with basketball worldwide. And he's my favorite, and I'm partial to him. Even if there was stuff that wasn't great in The Last Dance about some of his antics with his teammates.
Who cares?
Yeah.
The Last Dance was the greatest documentary ever made. Yeah. Like, I don't think that's even...
Just because it's about Jordan. I mean, you look at shoe brands. You got Nike, got Adidas, got Under Armour, and there's Air Jordan.
Jordan's before Under Armour. Let's go ahead and be clear.
But I'm just talking about if you list off shoe brands, Jordan is before Adidas.
Probably, honestly.
Yeah. But you just lift off shoe brands. Only one of them's named after a player. His impact's on the game's crazy. But I can't think of a player who just, in my opinion, did more insane things. We talked about how crazy like Trae Young's stuff he did in the playoffs was this year as a young player, all the scoring that he did. Michael Jordan went to the playoffs as a rookie and scored 60 points in a game against the dominating Boston Celtics, who won the Eastern Conference that year as a rookie.
Also, as a freshman, hit one of the greatest shots in college basketball history against Georgetown, one of the greatest teams in college basketball history. I like that you
Patrick
tied.
Ewing doesn't have a championship in anything because MJ knocked that shot down.
I like that. Like, look, I should have seen this coming. That's on
You
me.
should have.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 3 times.
Your answer is Kobe. Mine answer can be generic too.
That's totally fine. Like, no, I'm not mad. To be clear, I'm not mad about it. I like that you tied the Carolina thing because it matters beyond his basketball realm. Because, and this is what I've always felt about Jordan. Greatest debate aside, we'll save that like we always have. To be clear, we're not debating it until both players are retired. I like that you tied it because his impact, when you say basketball, there's probably 3 people that come to mind. And he's probably one and everyone else is behind.
Yeah.
The other reason I like that you tied it is because that goes beyond the Chicago Bulls. Mm-hmm. The Chicago Bulls were kind of a laughable franchise prior to Michael Jordan.
And there's more to as I think about it now, because I wasn't even thinking about it before, as to why. Because I mentioned that it is on the favorite side. I have an intense loyalty to Michael Jordan. He owns my favorite team.
Yeah. No, I mean,
he's right there.
Look, you have nothing short of multiple reasons, is my point. My thing, though, is the Carolina part of it. Like, you really, beyond the university, but like, he's not the reason Carolina's relevant. He's the reason they're a relevant brand. At the end of the day, the brand itself of North Carolina basketball, of when you think, if there's people out there, I know there are, that don't like the NBA and they only watch college, I'll be honest with you, probably 30% of those people live within 10 miles of both of us. And he's part of the reason of that, right? Like, when you think of brand, when you think of the way he just ushered basketball, the Chicago Bulls mean more. Basketball means more. Carolina means more, and the state of North Carolina means more. That's my favorite reason for Michael Jordan. I love it. I'm happy because as a North Carolinian, I'm proud of him. Mm-hmm. As weird as that is, obviously,
from all jokes aside, North Carolina.
All jokes aside, born in Northern New York, but literally at like 2 years old, moved to Wilmington. I hate when people do that. I hope so, if someone ever brings it up to me in the street, I'm like tripping them. Like, I'm not hearing that. He's born in New York, but at 2 years old moved here.
Do you tell people you're from the place you were born from if you move somewhere else afterwards?
Exactly.
Like, I don't.
Exactly. I just wanted to make that
where
clear.
I list my hometown.
There are trolls that will say that he is from New York, and I hate it. It is one of my least favorite things. Go look at Laney High School. Wow, I'm literally pulling the North Carolina bag here, right? Go look at Laney High School in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1979. Or 19, he would have been in there in 79. In 19, it would have been 1975.
He would have been there in 79.
Yeah,
his freshman year was 82, 81, 82.
Yeah, look at it, his whatever, freshman to senior year. Look at it in his time there. And look at that high school now. The amount of things he's done for that area, the school, the state, like, the list is endless, right? The lifestyle stuff aside, who cares? The Last Dance was the coolest thing we've ever seen, and it came out at the worst time in human history in terms of a pandemic, and it helped me through it. Cool. Thanks, Jordan. I appreciate it. It was great. Josh, it's Michael Jordan. Do we really have to spend any time on it?
No, it's MJ. I love MJ. I'm always going to love MJ.
Well, this episode actually lasted a lot longer than we thought. As an owner, you definitely should be all like for it, right? The drafting in the last 3 years has gotten better.
Thanks, Mitch Kupchak. Another Carolina guy.
I was going to say another. There it is, right? Tying the basketball world together. All around, honestly, a fun episode. We got to touch on NBA history. We got to touch on favorites, a little bit of opinion, everything that people hopefully love about this episode. So, Josh, any more thoughts before we try to figure out what to talk about for the next 6 days?
No, this was fun. I'm hoping for some just random news that can help us figure that out.
That, or Josh has said it many times, continue to send stuff on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. Please, suggestions for segments. We have 6 more weeks that you want us to survive on. Give us segments. Trivia will come soon. Trivia is coming. We're working on something. Just we'll leave it at that. Trivia is coming, but not the usual format for the season. Is not back until the season. I'll just spoil that. Josh, wrap us up.
This has been the Two Pointers Podcast. I'm Josh.
And I'm Trevor.
And we will see you soon.